Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Kennedy School Forum. My name is Elaine Kmark. I'm a lecturer here at the Kennedy School. I want to welcome all the guests, but I want to also give a particular welcome to our first-year students who are busily working away on their spring exercise, which this year happens to be how to respond to a pandemic flu event. And nothing could be better than to have here our guest for this evening, Frances Townsend. To understand the war on terror, to understand how the government is attempting to respond to this new world, not only of terror, but of catastrophic natural disasters, there is simply no one better. Not only is she serving in a field dominated by men, but she has been able to be promoted and to serve in both Democratic and Republican administrations. And in fact, her talent as a career public servant is really important here, because not many people manage to do both these things. When she was in the Justice Department during the Clinton administration, she was particularly close to Janet Reno, and therefore, even though she was a career public service servant, not a political appointee, when the new administration came in, she rightly assumed that she was on the outs. Sounds to me she did what several other women, myself included, did when we suddenly found ourselves on the outs, which is have another baby and get a new job. But the remarkable thing about Frances is that her qualities of public service, her attention to detail, her intelligence, and her perseverance are such that she is now one of the most trusted members in a Republican White House. And she serves the president. She is close to the president. Not many people can do this, and I think it's quite an extraordinary testament to her ability. She started out as a prosecutor in Brooklyn's DA office back in 1985. If you listen closely, you can still tell a little bit of that Brooklyn accent. And she joined the Justice Department in 1988, where she focused on international organized crime and white-collar cases. In 1993, she joined the Criminal Division and served as Chief of Staff to the Assistant Attorney General, and then she became Director of the Office of International Affairs in the Criminal Division. In 1997, she was appointed Acting Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division in the Justice Department, and there she became a close advisor to Attorney General Reno on international law and enforcement policy. In 1998, she was appointed Counsel for Intelligence Policy, managing issues pertaining to national security policy and operations for the department. After a brief tenure in the Coast Guard, also not exactly a woman's world, where she served as Assistant Commandant for Intelligence from 2001 to 2003, she moved over to the White House to be Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor for Combating Terrorism. In 2004, she was appointed Homeland Security Advisor by President Bush. In that capacity, she chairs the Homeland Security Council and reports to the President on Homeland Security policy and combating terrorism. From the wall between domestic investigations and international intelligence gathering to the lessons learned from the Katrina disaster, she's been at the heart of more debates on U.S. security than nearly every other person in Washington. She is the person with a small ego who is behind the scenes, who coordinates the work of people who are much better known and have much bigger egos. And these kinds of people are indispensable to presidents of the United States, which is why she has become so indispensable to this president. Let's give her a warm welcome, Frances Townsend.
Elaine, thank you for that very generous introduction. Whenever I hear somebody go through my resume and the jobs I've held, I think to myself, geez, they're going to think I can't hold a job. I've moved around a lot, and it's one of the real privileges of public service, the ability to move around within the government to gain additional experience in areas of interest. I will tell you, one of the things I said to the faculty when we met before the lecture was, you know, in Washington, if you don't care who gets the credit, you can get an awful lot accomplished. I am living proof of that. The notion that drove me to public service was to really return to the country, in some measure, with thanks and appreciation, the opportunities I was afforded. Let me just tell you what Elaine was kind enough not to mention. I am the first person in my family ever to graduate from high school, much less to go on to college and graduate school. And I was afforded extraordinary opportunities by virtue of my education, and really did want, in every noble sense, the opportunity to return and leave the country just a little bit better. One of the other things Elaine reminds me, believe me, I was surprised. I've told this story before. I got a call when I was working at the Coast Guard on my voicemail system to call Dr. Rice's office. Well, the interesting thing about that was the night before, my husband and I had a discussion about why I had not kept annual physical appointments. And so when I got this voicemail message, being at the Coast Guard, I thought, I cannot believe my husband had the nerve to make a doctor's appointment for me. Only to discover that the Dr. Rice, when I questioned him on it, was that Dr. Rice. And I thought, well, this is great. You know, I've never been into the West Wing, to the National Security Advisor before. This will be great. And I went in for an interview thinking it would be a one-time visit. When I was questioned, I said, do you understand who I worked for in the last administration? And she said, yes. And the reason I felt sort of compelled to bring that to Dr. Rice's attention was because at the time, former Attorney General Janet Reno was running against the President's brother, Governor Bush, to be governor of Florida. It is testimony, frankly, to a whole lot of things. Condi Rice and the President's commitment to field a competent person without political bias. That's dangerous. It's very dangerous to have somebody that close to the President of the United States. It's particularly dangerous for this President when two people, career people who had been close to him, ultimately turned up in the 2004 re-election campaign working for Senator Kerry. And so you have to understand that's the dynamic, and I think it's actually testimony to the system of public service that people like me, it's less testimony to me than it is to the strength of the integrity of the system of public service. That I am here means any one of you could wind up there and in that position, as long as what you care about is not credit, but service, and really a deeply held commitment to service. I'm delighted to have been invited to speak with you tonight, and I will talk a little bit about that section of the Katrina report, which is transforming national preparedness. It's a wonderful opportunity to be back with you. I count as mentors and as myself a student of people like Roger Porter and Phil Heyman, some of whom I served with. I was here at the Senior Executive Program in August of '01, just before September 11th, and so it's a privilege to be back with you. As you know from the introduction, I had the privilege of leading the Hurricane Katrina review. One of the many lessons, unfortunately, that we had to learn was that federal, state, and local governments, as well as the private sector, NGOs, and faith-based groups, we have not developed a shared sense, a shared vision, or a commitment to preparedness. In other words, we haven't developed a shared vision of what we must do to prevent, to protect, to respond to, and to recover from the next catastrophe. And without that shared vision that is acted upon by all levels of our nation and that encompasses the full range of preparedness and response capabilities, we will not achieve a transformational state of preparedness that the nation requires. And while this lesson grew out of our examination of the federal response to the most destructive natural disaster in the history of the United States, the concept of preparedness extends well beyond hurricane preparations. Preparedness, as you know, is intertwined with national security, with counterterrorism, with homeland security, and the strategies that enable those visions. It is an essential part of the framework for what we need to do to enhance the safety and the security of the American people. There are two immediate priorities for achieving a transformational national state of preparedness. First, to define and implement a comprehensive national preparedness system. And second, to foster a new robust culture of preparedness. This evening I'd like to talk with you about key points in each of these two priorities. First, implementing a comprehensive national preparedness system must involve making sure that we have an integrated system that ensures unity of effort in preparing for and responding to both natural and man-made disasters, at unity of effort at all levels of government and together with the private sector. This will require the federal government to transform the way it does business. But we must remember, in doing that, we must respect that in a federalist form of government, state and local officials have a substantial and primary responsibility for the protection of their own citizens. The most important objective in the transformation of the federal response will be to build and integrate a federal operational capability. Virtually all elements of the federal government will need to be operational in order to effectively respond to catastrophic events with unified effort when called upon by state and local officials. And there are three key requirements to achieving this goal. First, strengthening the Department of Homeland Security as an institution that is capable of managing the federal response. And perhaps most importantly, enhancing DHS's regional and field elements. Next, to reinforce the Secretary's role, the Secretary of Homeland Security's role, as the President's manager of the federal response. And third, strengthen the response capabilities, that is, the management and field resources of the other federal departments that will be called upon by the Department of Homeland Security for their capabilities that they can contribute to the response. Within DHS, it is essential to enhance the headquarters element to direct the federal response while also providing appropriate resources to field elements so that they can make a real impact on the ground. We must structure DHS headquarters to support the Secretary's incident management responsibilities. One important effort will be in creating a new National Operations Center to coordinate and integrate not only the national response at the federal level, but situational awareness, a common operating picture, if you will, so that we understand where the gaps are and what we are being called upon to provide in support of state and local efforts. DHS headquarters must also possess a robust capability for deliberate operational planning that applies lessons learned and develops plans that anticipate requirements for future responses, just as our U.S. military colleagues do. Below the headquarters, we must build up the department's regional structures and develop field personnel with the necessary resources, training, and national support. In order to create robust Homeland Security response capabilities, we must transform our interagency operational process and, most important, eliminate the extraordinary bureaucratic red tape. We must transform our approach for catastrophic incidents from one of bureaucratic coordination to a proactive, unified command that creates true unity of effort. At the federal level, the most urgent step in creating unity of effort will be to reinforce the Secretary of Homeland Security as the federal government's preparedness and incident manager. One model for the command and control structure for the federal response is our successful defense and national security framework. In that framework, there is a clear line of authority that stretches from the President through the Secretary of Defense to the combatant commander in the field. When a contingency arises, the combatant commander in that region executes the missions assigned by the Secretary of Defense and the President. Although the commander might not control forces on a day-to-day basis, during a military operation, he controls all military forces in his theater, exercising command authority and accessing the resources he requires to affect outcomes on the ground. While Homeland Security and defense models do diverge in important ways, we must ensure that the President's incident manager, without infringing upon the statutory responsibilities of the Cabinet Department and agencies, is able to and empowered to call upon the full range of the federal government's response assets and aggressively orchestrate, lead, and coordinate their use in response efforts. Beyond changes to the Department of Homeland Security and the structure of the federal response, there is still a compelling need to strengthen operational capabilities across the federal government. Those departments and agencies that have a responsibility to respond to a catastrophic event must build up their crisis deployable capabilities as well as their effective operational management. For example, HHS at one time had the National Medical Disaster System. Well, as you know from my report, it is my belief that it should go back, where it is again managed by public health professionals. In addition, HHS needs to make the Public Health Commissioned Officer Corps crisis deployable. EPA is another example. They need crisis deployable teams as well. And this is likewise true across the federal government. An effective national preparedness system requires that we build at all levels of government a leadership corps that is fully trained, educated, and exercised in our plans and doctrine. And beyond current plans and doctrine, we must require a more systematic and institutional program for Homeland Security, professional development, and education. Such a program should extend to all personnel with responsibility to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from natural and man-made disasters. DHS should establish a National Homeland Security University, analogous to the National Defense University, for senior Homeland Security personnel as a capstone for training and education. Our programs, these programs, must integrate state and local government officials as well as the private sector, NGOs, and faith-based organizations. As in every homeland crisis, all of our homeland partners must come together to respond. And therefore, to draw from the old military adage, we must train as we fight and fight as we train. Over the long term, our professional development and education programs must break down interagency barriers to build a unified team across the federal government. Again, drawing on experiences of DoD, which succeeded in building a joint leadership cadre, so too the rest of the government must have interagency and intergovernmental assignments to build trust and familiarity among diverse Homeland Security professionals. These assignments will break down organizational stovepipes and advance the exchange of practices and ideas. In effect, we need a Goldwater-Nichols type initiative for the civilian side of the federal government that mandates joint assignments as a condition of advancement. To ensure the success of the national preparedness system over time, it must possess the means to measure progress towards strategic goals and capability objectives. It must systematically identify best practices and lessons learned and have an effective process for conducting corrective or remedial actions when a systemic challenge is identified. And the system must remain dynamic. We must routinely revisit our plans and reassess our capabilities in order to account for evolving risks, improvements in technological capabilities, and preparedness innovations. An age-old question for national security planning, and now for Homeland Security planning, is how much is enough? In particular, at what level of preparedness do we feel confident that we have adequately accounted for the threats we face, our vulnerabilities, and the means we have to manage them? Recognizing that we cannot anticipate every threat, we as a nation must rely on a capabilities-based planning approach. In order to help identify the range of plausible future risks, including both terrorist attacks and natural disasters that our nation may confront, the Department of Homeland Security has produced a set of 15 national planning scenarios. While our national planning scenarios are a good start, we must not shy away from creating scenarios that stress the system of response to the breaking point and challenge our nation in ways that we wish we did not have to imagine. We must never again be in a position that we are accused of a failure of imagination. Current examples in the national planning scenarios include an earthquake in a U.S. city, the detonation of a 10-kiloton nuclear device in a large U.S. metropolitan area, an outbreak of pandemic influenza on U.S. soil. I will come back to the issue of a pandemic influenza later in my remarks. But returning to our broader discussion on transforming national preparedness, the second element of our continuing transformation for Homeland Security perhaps will be the most profound and enduring: the creation of a culture of preparedness. This new culture must emphasize that the entire nation shares common goals and responsibilities for Homeland Security. And just like our most important successes against al-Qaeda and other terrorists abroad have been made possible through effective partnerships, so too must the full scope of Homeland Security be built upon a foundation of partnerships. The first principle for a culture of preparedness must be a shared acknowledgement that creating a prepared nation will be a continuing challenge. We must temper our sense of optimism that is fundamental to the American character with a sober recognition that future catastrophes will occur. Our culture of preparedness must emphasize the importance of flexibility and readiness to cope with a broad range of challenges. Despite reforms that encourage a proactive and anticipatory approach to the management of incidents, the current culture of our response community has a fundamental bias towards reaction rather than initiative. Our new culture must stress initiative at all levels and encourage and reward innovation. To do so, our system must better align authority and responsibility. Those who are responsible for a mission must likewise have the authority to act. This also provides us with the ability to assess our performance. But performance assessment and accountability must not devolve to blame. The current culture of blame threatens both individual and institutional initiative and enterprise throughout the Homeland Security and national security professions. Our preparedness culture also must emphasize the importance of a citizen and community approach to preparedness, which are among the most effective means of preventing terrorist attacks, as well as protecting against, mitigating, responding to, and recovering from all hazards. Leadership at all levels will be essential in helping to transform citizen preparedness. Public officials and prominent national figures must begin a public dialogue that emphasizes common preparedness themes, and DHS must continue to build upon initiatives such as Ready.gov, public service announcements, and efforts through Citizen Corps. Public awareness messaging must shift to include more substantive information. We should follow the example of the Drop and Roll campaign used successfully in fire safety as part of the Learn Not to Burn program, as well as the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Buckle Up America campaign. These campaigns are models, and as with so many of these successful campaigns, as a mother of 2 small children, it is my heartfelt belief that our children will lead us. Finally, other Homeland Security stakeholders must be fully brought into our efforts, namely the private sector, NGOs, and faith-based groups. Each of these groups plays a critical role in preparedness, and to the extent that we can incorporate them into the national effort, we will reduce the burden on other vital response resources. Private sector companies own and operate more than 80% of our nation's critical infrastructure, and these companies are responsible for protecting their own systems. Because of this, private sector preparation and response is vital to mitigating the national impact of catastrophes. To maximize the nation's preparedness, all levels of government must join collaboratively with the private sector to develop plans to respond to major disasters. There are already important initiatives underway in this area by the Business Roundtable and business executives for the National Security Project. We must encourage and build upon these efforts. The private sector must be an explicit partner in and fully integrated across all levels of response. In times of crisis, NGOs, especially community, faith-based groups, and relief groups, play vital and essential roles in providing a human face, a helping hand, comfort, and compassion to all the American people. As such, they feel an essential need in the response system in ways far beyond the capacity of any level of government. Earlier, I mentioned the threat of an influenza pandemic, and I understand from the faculty that the first-year Masters of Public Policy students have been working feverishly for the last week and a half on their spring exercise. I will look forward to hearing about your focus and the results of your effort, As you may know, the Homeland Security Council is responsible for coordinating the U.S. government's efforts to prepare for a pandemic. Thank goodness I didn't have a week and a half. I've had the last year to work on preparing the plan. First, let me provide a little bit of context. For those of you not working on their project, pandemics happen, and there is little that we can do to stop them. The world has experienced 3 pandemics in the past century: 1918, 1957, and 1968. The worst of these pandemics was in 1918 and killed approximately between 20 and 40 million people worldwide, and 500,000 people in the United States alone. We are currently concerned about an avian influenza virus known as the H5N1 that is spreading with unprecedented speed in the bird population. To date, approximately 50 countries have found H5N1 in their bird population, and we have every reason to believe that the virus will appear in our wild bird population at some point, perhaps as soon as this year. While the virus currently presents a limited threat to humans, only approximately 200 persons are known to have contracted the infection from birds thus far. There is a very real possibility that the virus could change in such a way that allows it to infect humans more easily and to be easily transmitted from person to person. If this happens, it could be the start of a worldwide outbreak of influenza in humans, or a pandemic. The President takes this threat very seriously and has taken a number of steps to address it. He announced the National Strategy for Pandemic Influenza on November 1st of last year, and simultaneously sent a request to Congress for $7.1 billion to fund our preparedness efforts. Congress has thus far appropriated $3.8 billion of that request to date, and we have confidence that the rest will follow. The President also launched an international partnership on avian and pandemic influenza to encourage leaders of nations around the globe to take this threat seriously and to commit to a series of principles, including transparency, rapid reporting of cases, scientific cooperation, and the direction of resources to prepare their nations. To date, over 90 nations have joined and endorsed these principles. Since the launch of the strategy, the Homeland Security Council has led the development of a U.S. government-wide implementation plan, a document that translates the principles in the strategy to over 300 actions that are to be taken by departments or agencies in support of the plan. These actions include everything from establishing an avian influenza office at the Department of State to coordinate our international efforts, to dramatic investments in our domestic vaccine production infrastructure and technologies to ensure that we can make enough vaccine for the American population within months of the start of a pandemic. We have also asked all departments and agencies to develop their own pandemic plans to ensure that they create a safe work environment for their employees and have a continuity of operations plan. Tomorrow, on behalf of the administration, I will release this plan to the public. It isn't often that the government lays out this information in such detail, but we think it is important to demonstrate how seriously we take the threat and the many things that the government is doing to prepare. This brings us back to the issue of national preparedness. When it comes to a pandemic, it is not enough for the government to prepare, because it will be impossible for the federal government alone to assist all communities that are impacted by a severe pandemic. It is therefore essential for every part of society to prepare, from businesses to schools to families and local governments. Without this comprehensive preparedness, we will fail in our efforts to stem the impact of a pandemic. We have developed recommendations for communities on the steps that they can take to prepare for a pandemic. These recommendations represent a first start, and in coming weeks and months, you will see much more information like this coming from the federal government. All of it will be available on our government-wide website for pandemic information, pandemicflu.gov. Our continuing transformation of national and homeland security is not a choice. It is an absolute imperative. Within the government, we are working to implement many efforts and initiatives that will facilitate this transformation, but we must continue to have a national dialogue on shared responsibilities and expectations for the full range of counterterrorism and homeland security preparedness. You can help with that dialogue. Your faculty here has extraordinary public policy experience, and this academic environment encourages new ideas and fresh thinking. I know I was here in the summer of '01 in your senior executives program, and so I encourage you to continue to devote your time and energy to developing public policy options and solutions on these most important issues. Thank you. May God bless you, and I look forward to your questions.
That was wonderful. We're going to end promptly at 7 o'clock, so if people would please take places at the 4 microphones around. And let me remind everybody that we want questions, right, that are brief and to the point. And I'm going to start with one, and I'm going to ask Frances, when your report came out, there was a lot of focus on the bureaucratic aspects of it, on fixing the bureaucratic processes. Could you talk a little bit about the other half of emergency response, about leadership and about the improvisation that goes on in a national crisis?
I think probably the most important aspect of that is because you can't anticipate everything that could go wrong, everything that the federal government will be called upon to do, it's important to understand the plans, what your operational plans are, what the agreements between the agencies, what are the expectations, what are the capabilities they must build. If you can rely on those, then you can devote yourself to those things you didn't anticipate. One of the things we found, and we were pretty explicit about it in the report, was that people were not familiar with the National Response Plan. So that it wasn't executed very well should not be a surprise. People weren't familiar enough with it. They hadn't trained on it at all levels of government. And so I guess what I would say is we have to ensure that we are trained and prepared and exercised on the plan so we can devote our time and attention to those things that we have to improvise.
Hint to our first-year students. That's a really good hint. Okay. Please introduce yourself as you ask your question. I'm going to start here. We'll move around the room.
Hi, I'm John Montserrat. I went to a school down the river. I'm here to ask, one of the most important things about handling a pandemic is dealing with public panic, especially if you ask people to remain at home, but emotionally they're feeling they have to raise out to find their loved ones, they have to get food, they have to go to work. What kind of education are you planning on bringing to the public to get them ready for a surreal and never happened before situation like this?
Yeah, we have internal to the federal government and then working with state and local officials, communication strategies, education packages. We've spoken to all the networks, all the editorial boards, trying to educate them. For example, and we've put out Cabinet Secretary Johans at USDA and also Secretary Leavitt of HHS. One of the first things we want to communicate is one infected bird in this country does not make a pandemic. Multiple infected birds does not necessarily mean it is a highly contagious or pathogenic to people. And so this is unlike your average natural disaster or terrorist event. This is not going to be a kinetic event. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and it's going to be dead people all around your street. It is likely to unfold over time. And that's why planning and preparedness in the community sense is going to be very important. People ask me, you've got kids, what are you suggesting? What do you do right now where there's not yet a pandemic? We don't even know that we will ever have avian flu in people. And I say, get your flu shot. Build up your resistance to a general influenza virus so that if people start then coming down with a flu-like symptom, we can focus on those, if they've had their general flu, we can focus on those who have no protection or are particularly vulnerable, weak, ill, otherwise have a chronic illness. And so this is more a matter of understanding when not to panic.
Up here.
Hi, my name's Caroline Adrianska. I'm a first-year student in the Master in Public Policy program, so I'm working on avian flu. My question pertains to ventilators. One of the things that would be really useful if a pandemic does hit and a lot of people do get sick would be ventilators. However, they're really expensive. And how do you think about that? There's probably no way that we could ever have enough ventilators to go around in a pandemic. And, they do depreciate. So is that something that you're thinking about in terms of a strategic national stockpile, or is that something that's put aside?
No, you're absolutely right. Ventilators will be critical. we are both concerned about that in the context of, and you're going to find that I'm going to, because the plan is not publicly released yet, I'm going to be careful about how much detail I go into. You will find we both deal with that in the context of the National Strategic Stockpile, but also in terms of community and local public health officials, so they can start thinking about, one, both increasing their stock, and two, what will be, thinking through now, what will be the indicators and how they will deploy what limited resources they have. That will essentially be a public health concern and call. But what we've said to people is what you need to do is think through what the conditions and your priorities for deployment are before you're put in that situation. And again, we are working through this both at the federal level and the state and local level.
Thank you. My name is Sean Carberry. I'm a student here, and I should mention I'm graduating next month and looking for a job.
How'd you do?
I'm doing fine, thanks. And we'll see after this discussion. There's a lot of discussion right now, obviously, about preparedness and response, and also about FEMA, its role, its future, where it belongs, what its name should be. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, FEMA was doing pretty well in the late 1990s and was viewed as a very strong and successful organization. Some people felt it shouldn't have been pulled into DHS, and that was putting too much under DHS, which is why FEMA has struggled since then. Do you think that FEMA's mission is DHS's mission is too large, having prevention, preparedness, and response? And would it make sense to return to the previous structure where FEMA dealt with all hazards, preparedness and response, and DHS focused more on prevention, dealing with the security threats?
You know, the difficulty in pulling them apart is that when you look at it, imagine sort of the circle that knows no beginning and no end. One is a critical enabler to the other. How much you need in terms of response is a direct function on how prepared or ill-prepared you are. And so it's all part of the same continuum. And so it's difficult for me to imagine having them broken apart. I understand the concern. And I will tell you, it's a real Washington parlor game to me. We tend to, the minute something isn't working quite right, our initial reaction is, let's look at the bureaucratic organization. I would challenge a little bit the assumption that FEMA was better prepared to respond in the 1990s to an event the size of Katrina. I say to people, imagine the devastation, complete devastation that you saw in a number of square city blocks on September 11th, spread across 93,000 square miles. If you have not seen it, you cannot imagine. It is completely flattened. I mean, buildings don't exist. They've just been completely blown away. And the notion that FEMA, at any point in its history, was going to be capable of adequately responding to a catastrophe of that size, I just think is unrealistic. That said, that's in a post-9/11 world, we need an organization that is capable. And I mean, I think we're not going to get there without private sector advice. One of the great quotes from my Katrina press conference when I released the report was, you know, FedEx knows where every box is, every minute of every day, and when it's going to get to you, but we can't figure out when the buses are going to get there. Well, the answer is we need to look to our private sector colleagues, and I've spent a lot of time with the private sector talking about supply chain management, understanding leadership and management techniques, training, lessons learned, how you incorporate it, how you plan for a catastrophe. Many of the private sector, Walmart and Home Depot and those people did quite well in terms of moving blue tarps around, a whole lot better than we did. And so it's not impossible for the government to do that, but the government's got to be open to taking lessons from the private sector and being real partners in being able to do that. But I think you want to do that inside a department that understands what the most likely threat is and how you're most likely, what's the most likely catastrophe, so that it remains all part of the same continuum. Over here.
Thank you for being here. My name's Noah Sawyer. I'm a second-year student. My question is about two different parts of what you discussed today. And the first is this idea of a unity of command in times of crisis. But then I'm wondering how you connect that with also the intention to bring private sector and NGO partners into crisis management. When you have more players, how do you make this new unity of command structure work, especially when there are organizations that don't necessarily respond directly to the federal or even state government?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I looked for models. I am here to tell you that when I approached this report, I said, look, it doesn't have to be my original idea. I'm happy to take good ideas from lots of people. And so I traveled around and went to states that have dealt with hurricanes and who have incorporated private sector. North Carolina and Florida are two. In their state emergency operations center, they have somebody who does nothing but coordinate charitable contributions and private sector so that they can say, we do need blankets, we don't need blue tarps, you know what I mean? Don't send me that because I don't know what to do with it. And that really works. And this is an area where the federal government needs to get better at it, but in the end, I am convinced that it's at the state and local level where they know what they need from the private sector. And it also gives the private sector the ability to plug in at a place where they know people have a realistic view of what's happening on the ground. So I would say to you that there are models for doing it, and those are those states who have the experience.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Brian Cole, and I'm an internal medicine and public health physician that's a newly admitted student to the Kennedy School of Government, class 2007. I'd like to, first of all, say thank you very much for your long and impressive history of service to our country. I'm impressed by your resume and your affability and the service not only to our country, but our president. My question has to deal with disaster preparation. I practice medicine in Hawaii and here in Massachusetts, and I was really struck by the South Asia tidal wave. And I remember initially when there was a lot of rancor about tidal wave predictions. I know in Hawaii we have gauges in the center of the Pacific, but they're not positioned all over the world. Can you tell me a little bit more about, since you were a Coast Guard commandant, I'm sure you were worried about these types of things, and how we as the leaders and servants of the world, as the United States government, are thinking about other people around the world?
Absolutely. You can imagine in the wake of the tsunami, the president asked the question that you're asking and brought in, smartly didn't look to me for that answer, he brought in his science advisors, the NOAA in particular, who talked about that this is knowable and doable. This is a question of investment. And we've worked with the international community to understand we've got to be careful to not put ourselves in the position of, whether it's at the federal government assuming responsibility for things we can't effectively do that are really state and local responsibilities, or even in the international community where we can lead, but that doesn't necessarily mean we accept the entire burden of putting it in place. We have worked both with the State Department and NOAA and the international community to try and impress upon them the need to make this a priority. This is a question of priorities and investments and limited resources. Whether it's we're investing money to try and prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS in Africa, or genocide in Sudan and Darfur. I mean, it's a question of the international community making it a priority. Have we made enough progress? The answer is probably not. But I think that it's worth continuing to try and make it a priority, because if something were to happen, they'll wonder why we didn't do more.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
Hello. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. My name is Dimitris Valatsas. I'm a first year at the college. And I have a question about different responses from different nations to the terrorist threat. I'm quoting from Prime Minister Tony Blair's speech at Parliament the day after the attacks. Together we will ensure that though terrorists can kill, they will never destroy the way of life we share and which we value, and which we will defend with the strength of belief and conviction, so that it is to us and not the terrorists that victory will belong. And now I'm quoting from ready.gov. Terrorists are working to obtain biological, chemical, nuclear and radiological weapons, and the threat of an attack is very real. All Americans should begin a process of learning about potential threats, so we are prepared to react during an attack. While there is no way to predict that this will happen or what your personal circumstances will be, there are simple things you can do now to prepare yourself and your loved ones. The Department of Homeland Security is therefore at the forefront of this process, seeking to change the way Americans view their everyday life. It is its primary mission to have people be constantly prepared for terror, therefore permanently afraid of terror. You are seeking to place terror in permanence and certify its existence in every American family across the country. are you, in effect, the certification or even the drive of a gradual disappearance of American society's freedom from fear?
This is actually, my belief is, and I think it is more accurate to say, that preparation is the antidote to fear. That is, if you're prepared for something, you fear it less. You fear what you don't know and what you haven't anticipated, what you've been surprised from. And the answer is, it's not that we're trying to frighten the American people. What we're trying to do is engage in sort of an unemotional dialogue about what you can do. I can tell you on September 11th, I have 2 children. One was old enough to be in school at the time, and he was very frightened. I went to pick him up from school, as did every other parent at school that day, and he was frightened because he didn't know when I was coming, if I was coming, or how to contact me. He's older now, but we have a communications plan. He also knows that because I work for the president, I won't be there. I won't be there for him, but his father will be there. The nanny will be there, his grandparents will be there, and he has a sense of what to expect, how it will unfold, and that he has some sense of control. We didn't do that for my son to feel fear. We did that so that he knew exactly what to anticipate, and in fact, he is less afraid. I use that as a personal example to tell you, I think that's the better analogy to what we're trying to engage in with the American people. It's not fear, it's preparation.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 questions if we're nice and short. Okay?
Hi, my name is Michelle Rozier, and I'm an MPP1 here at the Kennedy School. And my question is also on FEMA. I was wondering if you could explain the rationale behind the decision to call back the aid given to some of the people in New Orleans, and specifically the rationale behind charging interest on that aid.
The only aid, I want to let me caveat this because I'm a little bit guessing based on your question what you're talking about. The only aid that was called back, or called back with interest, people were told that when they were given certain types of aid, individual assistance for example, that they were given a set amount, but that they would have to provide receipts and how they spent it. And they were also given sort of conditions about what the kinds of things that money could be spent on. If they failed to provide receipts, it depended on what category they fell in, they wouldn't get additional monies, or they would be asked to return that money with interest. So they were told that before they were given the money itself. Unfortunately, this was an effort, frankly, to prevent and to try to anticipate and prevent fraud. Regrettably, there were people who sought to take advantage of the disaster and tried to take advantage of and get government monies that they were not entitled to. That's really, I think, what you're seeing is a response, but this was anticipated at the time they got the check, so this shouldn't have come as a surprise, and presumably, in the case you're describing, they weren't entitled to the money in the first place.
Final question.
Hi, my name is Christina Cairns, and I'm an interested member of the community. And my question is around explosives detection, and wondering if there is anything that we're doing to step up the detection of explosives to prevent events like the London and Madrid bombings.
Well, let me make one distinction, because you mentioned the subway system, which is a very, very difficult and different environment than the aviation. We control, the aviation industry is a closed environment, and so it's easier for us. We push R&D technology, research and development, to try and get more and more accurate, quick responses out of the equipment. And we continue to invest in that. The difficulty with an open system, which is buses, trains, is that we don't control the environment. We looked at it, as you might imagine, in the immediate aftermath of the London bombings. What kinds of things could you do? We're never going to close that system because it'll no longer be useful and people won't go into the subways. The kinds of things you saw us do and continue to encourage state and locals to do are public awareness campaigns, to use dogs. They're the most effective technology we have to detect explosives. They need rest, they need training, they're expensive, their handlers need training, and so we tried to increase availability of detection dogs. But there isn't really good sort of equipment, if you will, stuff that you can deploy in an open environment, although we continue to work with sort of technology and private sector communities to see if we can't sort of spur research and development to create it.
Okay, thank you.
I want to remind everyone that you can see Ms. Townsend tomorrow morning, right, in the White House briefing room discussing the President's plans for pandemics. So you can see her make some news tomorrow morning, and I want to thank her so much for coming here tonight, particularly before having such a busy day. And we promised we'd get her out at home to her children, and let's give her a big round of applause. You're welcome, sweetheart. Good luck to you.